Welcome to round number 6 of the 2021 Kart Championship. Here are the points after round number 5 last time out at Brighton Karting Q Leisure, an event which ended up going quite well for me. I managed to eke out my points lead now ahead of John. Going to the final 3 rounds, there is still every possibility that anyone in the top 3 can win this championship, but of course now looks likely it'll between the top 2 of us here. So 483 points to John on 369. Greg is on 309, Dad is on 196. And in the second half of the standings we see Mike on 152, George on 97, Tom C on 96, and then Jake on 56. Going to round number 6, we were expecting a big grid, but unfortunately some late pullouts for the entry list meant that only 3 of us were out there racing today. Myself, John, and also George out there. So it was unfortunate to lose a few from the entry, but regardless, we're all looking forward to an exciting event here at Lydd towards the end of 2021. We had no rain, just a very interesting but cold Lydd circuit ahead of us. So we'd start in reverse championship order in the rolling start, which meant that George would lead the way from John and then myself in third. This is the only perspective we have here today. And the camera angle isn't great, unfortunately, but regardless, you may hear from my shouting that John made a fantastic move on George down into turn 1 on lap number 1 to take the lead of the race. So that's George just in front of us here, so we're trying to find a way past him and get into second place, but every single corner on this cold track was a little bit tough in the early stage, so I didn't want to risk anything too silly because George hasn't got as much karting experience as the rest of us. He's obviously done a good amount within our championship, but in relative terms to myself and John, he's still lacking some experience. I didn't want to dive it down the inside or do something crazy, spin out and then make contact with George. So I wanted to make sure it was a nice fair overtake on George, but the thing is, he's so quick in a straight line, and his racing lines aren't terrible now, they're getting better, so he's placing the car in the right place most of the time to defend. You can see he's taking the inside line down to turn 1. Not unsure whether he was defending or trying that as a different racing line. I try and get the exit on him here. We're running side by side after the first complex, and I think now I just about get enough of an overlap, get past and into second position. But by this point John has put in a fantastic lap and a half and is already leading by about 2 seconds. The gap isn't insane, but he's had a good lap on cold tyres on a cold track and he's done the business early on. John has led races around Lydd before when we've done the reverse grid restarts, but unfortunately for him he's never been able to hang on to a race victory here at Lydd. So a good amount of laps led, but no race victory for John round Lydd. And actually it's a track he said he typically struggles at. Just the layout of the track doesn't particularly work for him. Some parts flow really nicely, but other parts, I'd say the second complex of corners before you loop back on yourself, the ones we're going into here, aren't the best sometimes. But weirdly today, even though the cones are there to stop us going over the curbs, it felt quite good for whatever reason. It was a bit windy out there, but that maybe helped us, who knows. So you can see, even though the camera angle isn't perfect, there is a bit of a gap to John in front of us here. We're not closing it down that quickly, and these are only 15-minute races here, so it's unlikely that we'll be able to close up to him if we keep up this pace. So I really needed to step on that accelerator and close the gap to him. Otherwise it looked like it could be a victory here for John, but he was setting his personal best lap times at this point and generally just doing a fantastic job, possibly his best drive at Lydd ever at this point. He probably didn't realise it at the time, but his lap times were quite spectacular, which was good to see from him. 5 minutes later into this race, and with about 7 minutes to go in this one, I've started to catch John, but not that significantly. You can see the gap there is still hovering around a second. I'd say at most I've gained a second and a half over those 5 minutes. The lap time difference hasn't been that big, but you can see here a couple of mistakes at the early part of this lap for John has led to him being caught by me more significantly in this one. And strangely, because of the layout of the Lydd circuit, it has lots of big straights and the braking zones aren't that aggressive, so you aren't really able to get an overtake in unless you have a significant advantage over the Kart in front. So that was going to be a tricky one. We haven't particularly caught John over these last few laps, that significantly at least. It might be less than a second over the last 3 or 4 laps. So to get past him will be pretty tough, but you can see here we are starting to catch him. He's becoming a little bit more easy to see within our limited camera perspective here, but we're getting into the second part of this race now. So John does realise that we're in a race here. He's going to start taking the more defensive lines, which should allow me to get past if I make the right move, put the Kart into the right place here. But as mentioned, it was quite windy out there today, so from lap to lap, sometimes the line, the same line, didn't do the same thing out there because of the wind blowing you all over the place here. So I could see, from my thoughts at least, I was quicker through these last couple of corners. Quite visible there. Yes, John did make a slight mistake, but regardless, I think I was quicker in general through the last 2 corners. That was where I saw my main advantage to John here. I was probably picking up a couple of attempts there, but the rest of the lap, it wasn't that evident where I was catching him. So on the other side of the circuit now, looping back on ourselves, and I think I was a little bit quicker into here, but you can see a little bit of oversteer mid-corner meant I couldn't quite get the line through the corner that I wanted. So let's try again. It's going to take me a couple of corners to get back into the right place, but I am right behind him now. I've realised that slipstreaming and karting, maybe at the professional level, does something. I don't know how much it really does at amateur rental level here, but regardless, I'm sure getting up in that slipstream did help a little bit down the back straight, and once again I think a decent run through those corners has put me within sight of an overtake of John. So we're going through the first couple of corners. Right behind him once more, you can see this is probably the closest we have been. I'm looking to the inside. Still quite a fast corner though, even though this left-hander here possibly is the slowest corner on the track. It's hard to say. Right behind him here, and I nearly ran into the back of him here. Very lucky there wasn't an incident there. I did have to hit the brakes a little bit harder than I expected going into that corner. I think possibly John, being a little bit defensive, didn't quite get on the accelerator as quickly as I expected, which caused me to hit the brakes, and of course that's cost me a bit of momentum. It's going to take a few more corners to get back up to speed now. So let's see what I can do here as we're heading down to the final 2 corners once more. I think, as we've seen over the last few laps on board here, this is definitely the sequence where I can catch John, but is it really an overtaking opportunity? That's the tough one really. I'm going to have a really good run off of the long left, turn into a quick right to get any possible chance of an overtake in here. So once more into the second complex. We're close, but are we going to make the same mistake as last time? John's starting to defend the inside line here. Not typically the best, as it does leave you to wash out wide, but he's still got a decent run through here. I'm going to look to the inside here. This isn't really an overtaking opportunity because of the single file nature of this long left-hander, which turns into a sharp right onto the back straight, but I'm right behind him here into the final sequence of corners. Can I get past him? I look to the inside. John runs a tad wide, but doesn't leave enough of a gap for me to go past it. So that's going to be the tough thing. He's not going to really leave the gap, of course, because he's racing here for the victory. So this is going to be an interesting few laps here to see whether we can get past. I'm all over the back of him here. Can I get past? No, once more, he's defending the line. Really good stuff here from John. And with 3 or so laps to go, is John going to have to take his first victory at the Lydd Kart circuit? Well, there is a problem emerging just in front of us here. We've got George to get past, to lap in this race. You can see we're trying to go side by side here. John gets slightly cut up through here as George is quick in a straight line, so it's going to be tough for John to get past here, but I'm right behind John. He's right behind George to try and lap him. Is it going to quite work out? No, John hasn't got past. He's still having to try and get past George. But there we are, into the first corner, not working. So John is going to have to stick behind him for a little bit more. He looks to the left-hand side of George. Can he get past that way? It doesn't look like it. We're side by side here for the race lead. I get a little bit sideways when trying to overtake him. I think we're still side by side here as we go to try and get past George. I think I've taken the lead. It's very hard to say because of the camera perspective. I've run a bit wide. George has managed to pull away, and I think John has nipped down the inside of us here. Yes, you can just about see him go past there to retake the lead of this race. So it's all going on as we're trying to lap George here. We're swapping the positions for the lead of this one, and it could be championship decider. If John loses this one, maybe there's too much of a gap to really pull it back in the last 2 rounds. Up to the final corner and across the line, John is going to win. Very, very stressful end to that one. Great stuff there from John. I give him the thumbs up. Great racing there. His first ever win at the Lydd Kart circuit. There we are. He takes the win. Personal best of a 49.4. My personal best was a bit quicker there, a 48.7 essentially. George with the 51.7 fastest lap. The lap times aren't too bad with the extra weight on board, if you know what I mean. Regardless, race number 2, and the second of only 2 races here today at Lydd. Not quite as many as we've seen in some of our rounds this season, but regardless, we're ready to go back on board with myself here for this one. So the championship lead would have closed up after that last one, even though I did get the faster lap time. Of course, the points for the race victory are much more significant. So I want to try and beat John in this one, but to be fair, in that first race he put up a good defence, and I wasn't really expecting to go out there and win. I thought that it was going to be a tough one. So John is just in front of us here, and let's see whether we can get past him here at Lydd. So I did think I had the pace over a lap. I suppose we did see that with the fastest laps from that first race, but to be fair, John with his defensive manoeuvres really didn't allow me to get past, even with that small pace advantage. A little bit of oversteer mid-corner, and then John I think possibly did the same at the exit, and he I think let me go down the inside there. He wasn't going to fight that one off too much, so there we go. And we're still, I think, both trying to catch up to Georgia, I remember correctly here. Unfortunately, we don't have a proper grid start like we have done at some of our races, so George did have a pretty significant advantage at the end of this one, or the start of this one I should say. He had a pretty big gap before we actually got to start the race, which is fine. It gives him a good chance considering there was a little bit of a pace deficit there. But I'm chasing down George here. He's leading the race, so can I get past him? As we've seen in the first one, towards the end of it, it was tough to get past George, even though he was maybe a second slower, maybe even 2 seconds slower towards the end when he was getting fatigued. He was doing a pretty good job at keeping us behind. I think he wasn't fully aware we were behind him to lap him. So we've caught up to George here. I think he was struggling a bit with the cold. There isn't much of George, bless him. So in these sort of colder conditions, it's always a little bit tough. So he goes a bit wide. Now we're side by side going to the switchback turn at the top of the track. George washes out a bit wide. I tried to cut back underneath, and we're going side by side. George, as mentioned, has the better exit out of the corner thanks to that lightweight, and he tucks back into first position and onto the back straight in a second here. He's surely going to pull away even further. Yes, we can follow him in the slipstream, but what's going to happen here? Can we get past him at the end of this straight? I think I was pretty good on the brakes in comparison to George here, but I mess up the apex there, completely missed the both of the final 2 ones there, and that's lost me some time. Keep looking over my shoulder there to see whether John is alongside me, but he didn't quite manage to get the side-by-side maneuver, which means I can focus on getting past George in the leader of this one. But still, a few laps into this race, George is putting up a good defence. He's still leading this one. Can I take the inside line here? No, I can't. I get a little bit sideways in the middle of the corner, run out a tad wide, and John squeezes past, and now I'm down to 3rd place. There's the saying about only needing 2 vehicles for a motor race, and I think that one's coming through here today. A really exciting first race, one where I lost time early on to George and then caught up to John, but still couldn't get past. And then this one where the lead has changed hands multiple times, with George still leading this one ahead of John, with myself currently sitting in 3rd place here. I look one way, then the next, still can't quite get past John here to the first sequence of corners. So you can see I'm trying my best to look on the lines that John isn't currently deciding to go on, and I unfortunately got slightly over the curb there, and actually possibly slightly onto the grass, because when I went on the brakes I got a little bit of a squirm from the car which I hadn't experienced before, so I think I possibly dipped a wheel onto the grass. But John side by side on George to get past, and I follow him through. John possibly capitalising on a slight exit mistake from George on the previous corner. He got alongside down the inside, and I get to go past as well thanks to that mistake from George, which possibly put him slightly off guard, and that allowed me to get into second position. But right now John is doing his best to close up in the championship battle. Could he get 2 from 2 here at Lydd today after not ever winning around this circuit in the many years that our little family championship has raced round here? I looked to the inside once more, but John, after the first race experience, knows exactly where to place his kart. I did speak to him and George after the first race. I mentioned to John where I was slightly catching up to him, but to be fair, you can see in corners like that, he's still managing to pull away. While the overall championship possibly could be a bit of a stretch for John right now, there's no reason why he can't finish off this season with a number of wins and possibly some fastest laps as well to bounce forward into 2022 and maybe go for the championship. We'll see how that goes. COVID pending, the 2022 season should start at the start of the year like it has done in every other year, unlike 2021 where everything essentially was on hold. So a lap or so behind John, not really being able to get past. There's a couple of corners that I've managed to, I'd say, get close, but this possibly could be the best one so far, diving down the inside at the switchback turn. But I don't get the best of exits, which means I think we're side by side with John. He takes the inside line once more and he gets past once again. It's been some great racing here today. I'm sure that the laps aren't particularly fast. That, as mentioned, can be down to the weight, possibly the wind as well, but also the fact we're having good battles here. We're not throwing it down the inside without any hope at all of making the overtakes done. We're sort of only going for it when it's really sensible enough to really see it as a viable overtake. And I think the races has been really good here today. It's been really good to see John go for some aggressive overtakes here. Not sure what's happening here. I must have thought there was something on the visor, just trying to get something off of it there, but that's cost me a little bit of time as I'm trying to sort that out, but hopefully we can catch that back up. But to be fair, John's done a really good job in this race, just as in the first, but possibly we could see the fatigue starting to settle in as the races are essentially back to back. George says he was struggling after the first race, so he did a good job early on in this one to keep us behind for so many laps, but we don't know whether we're going to be coming up to lap him once more in this one, so that could be an interesting dilemma that we see towards the end of this race here. But so far John's still leading, doing a great job, not made any mistakes. He's got the switchback multiple times and got the re-overtake in. He's, as you can see, not taking the ultra defensive lines because I think he realises that will really hurt his exit speed if he starts going super defensive, and I think he knows that, so he's purposely kind of driving the normal racing line, which actually around Lydd isn't a bad shout for just a defending line too, because as we've seen, it's very hard to get the overtake in without a significant pace improvement over the person in front. But here it looks like we've got a good run. Are we going to make the dive down the inside? As we've seen over the last few laps, I've generally done a good job into the final sequence of corners, but I hadn't had a particularly good run through there, and John, as we've seen already in this one, has switched back and got back past into the lead this one. So I made the dive into the final sequence of corners, but that did kind of kill my exit speed, which means that John was able to get alongside into turn 1, and when you're side by side into turn 1, there's not really much point from the outside position trying to dive to the apex. It's just going to be an incident. So we're still side by side here into the long right then left complex here. I think John thought he cut across me there and he possibly could have just gone for the apex, but no, he's left me the space and we're still running side by side here down the back straight. I give John a little hang loose hand signal because it was great to go side by side there, but essentially I did have the better line going to the final sequence of corners, and now after I think I get a curbing flag there, I've got to settle down and try and put in some good lap times because I'm in the lead. I think I do have a slight pace advantage over John. It's not much, it's only a couple of tenths of a second lap by lap. I think in the last race we did see me get a good lap time in, but I think that was when I was catching up to John. Once I got to behind him, I wasn't really able to find enough of a pace advantage. But as we skip towards the last lap of this race here, I was able to stay in the lead, so not much action from this point of view here. Trying to just put in those consistent lap times, try and keep it as quick as possible without overdriving it and throwing away this victory within our little championship. But round the final corner, up to the checkered flag. The wins are shared between myself and John here today. Some great racing. I'd say that's John's best weekend here at Lydd. I think he was quite happy with it. So let's have a look at the standings here today. After race number 2, I win with a personal best slightly better than the first race. John also going quicker in the second one, and likewise with George. He dropped back, but this time didn't get lapped, so I think George having a nice improvement in that second race of the day as well. And at the top of the championship, the gap has only gone up by 4 points, thanks to us both getting the points for a race victory and a second place. But I managed to get the fastest lap in both races, which ekes out that championship lead by 4 whole points. So it's still all to play for. If I have a bad end to this season, John can definitely be with a shout, and after the great performance here today, who knows what can happen. Greg unfortunately missed this round. I think he was one of the late exits of the championship, and this would actually be his last round of the championship. So how will 309 points fare at the end of the year? Dad was 4th in the championship. George was 5th now, ahead of Mike, who's on 152 points, but will be making a return at the latter stages of this season. Tom and Jake will be both coming back for some of the last rounds of the season as well, so that's going to be exciting to see how they fare. And we also have one new person coming to the championship for the next round of the season, so that should be exciting to see how they fare. So good to see once again some really good racing here in our go-kart championship. Be sure to tune in soon for the penultimate round of the year.